This is Chelsea.
And this is Caroline. Welcome to the Med Surg Moments, the AMSN podcast.
This podcast is an engaging look at the lives of and surrounding medical surgical nurses.
We're proud Med Surg nurses just like you, sharing our stories, insights, and experiences to support you in your nursing journey.
We're talking about sepsis today. I think that's a hot topic. But first, let's get into some personal stuff. So, Caroline, what's been going on with you?
Well, we're wedding planning central. If we have any regular listeners, you've been following the journey. We are T-minus 9 days to my daughter's wedding. And that's been the focus of my attention. And in a few days' time, I have family and friends arriving from England, and a small army of people from one state to another is going to be quite interesting. That's been my focus for the last few months, and now it all culminates in 9 days' time.
It's 9 days' time in like regular time, but in wedding time, it's like 2 days.
Yes, right. And I'm the kind of person that this has been coming for 8 months, and it's like 8 months, 7 months, plenty of time, no worries. And now it's like, okay, it's not this weekend, it's the weekend after. Have we done this? Have we done that? Have we done the other? And my daughter has done all of the planning in the most effective way. And she's going to say, really, you're just asking now about all of this, you know? So, but yeah, that's been my focus. How's our world traveler? How is the travel assignment going? Have you moved on again, or are you still at the same place?
Yeah. So for our listeners, I finished up my very first travel assignment sometime in November. December the 6th is when I started like my second new travel assignment. So I just finished that up, but I decided to renew because I really like the facility that I'm at. So I've been off for 4 days now, and I'm going to start my second contract with them today, actually, later today, a night shift. So
wonderful.
That's exciting.
I know they're happy to have you. And if you like what you're doing, then it doesn't become such a chore. So that's great. That's great.
Yeah. They were ecstatic that I'm resigning, and they have a lot of nurses that are leaving. So
yeah, it's
a great hospital, a lot smaller than what I'm used to, but I enjoy my work there. So that's been happening, that and nursing school. So those have been like the two things on my plate. I try to get away when I can. DC, Richmond, whenever I can. I have a nice vacation coming up in Los Angeles, so that'll be nice.
Oh, lovely.
I'll be there for a week, so I cannot wait. I went to LA for the first time in 2019. Haven't been back since because of the pandemic, but finally at a point where I'm comfortable enough to go. So we'll be going to LA. It's a much needed vacation.
Yeah, good for you. Well, enjoy that. It's a great place to be. And the world is definitely opening back up, and people are still being cautious, I think, but it's now possible to pick up with the things that we enjoyed. So have the best time there. That's great.
So Caroline, from your perspective as a nursing educator, what bells ring off in your head when you hear sepsis?
First words that come into my head is priority. Everything has to stop for an assessment or a reassessment of our patients. The second thing that comes to mind is don't hesitate. If in doubt, put in that call, put in that sepsis alert or that rapid response or whatever your facility uses to trigger a protocol, an alert, some kind of action. To me, we tend to hesitate sometimes because we think, oh, well, these numbers are just borderline. The patient's stable. They're alert. They're oriented. But for how much longer? Certainly, from my experience, patients can turn on a dime very quickly. And then, of course, you have all the rapprochement and the what if, or I should have done this earlier, or why didn't I recognize this? And I'm going to jump right into one of my best stories. It's, good news, bad news story. When I was at the bedside, and it kind of talks about everything that we should be thinking about when we have a patient that is developing sepsis. So I call this my Friday, Monday story. And it was one of those crazy Fridays. You're running around, there's so much going on. And there was one patient that concerned me. He just concerned me. I was in the room and I was checking vitals and I was doing assessments and reassessments and then mini assessments. And he was rounded on. Everyone saw him. The team saw him. And everyone was just kind of cautious, but nothing was really put into place in the immediate sense of call a sepsis alert. So I remember saying to the night nurse, just watch this guy. I don't know what's going on. His numbers are just okay. Watch him closely. And so the weekend came and went, and I came back to work Monday morning. The patient was still there. I got him back as part of my assignment. And this was like a different person. He didn't recognize me. He had no recollection of what had happened on Friday. His neurologic status had changed completely. And it's not always the first system that we think about when we think about sepsis. We think about fever, we think about infection. But he was, borderline delirious. And I said to the night nurse, how long has he been like this? And of course, it was the perfect storm. What did she say? This is my first night with him. I really don't know him that well. And the day shift nurse was the first shift with him as well. I said, well, this is not his baseline. This is a big change. And I immediately called the sepsis alert. He was transported to ICU. The guy responded to treatment. He lived to tell the tale. The outcome was good. But for many weeks afterwards, I reproached myself and I kept saying, I should have done something more. I should have called the sepsis alert on Friday. We should have got him transferred, or he wouldn't maybe have even needed to be transferred. So I say all that to say this: use the tools that you have available to you. Sepsis screening is becoming very standard in the Med Surg environment. Use those tools, and if those numbers, even if they're borderline, call a sepsis alert, initiate a protocol, and do everything that needs to be done for that patient to prevent a negative outcome occurring. That's my sepsis story. And this guy was clearly septic by Monday morning. And on that Friday, we had the underpinnings of what was going on. But for many different reasons, it was just missed. And that's why protocols are put into place. And that's why alerts are put into place. So if there's one takeaway from this, don't hesitate to kick everything into action. The healthcare team would much rather, I think, have a sepsis alert called and them say, everything's good, everything's fine, but thanks for letting us come and reassess this patient, than what developed over this weekend and this patient becoming much sicker than he needed to be.
I think that's a great story, Caroline. Most of my sepsis patients come up from the ED. They call the sepsis code in the emergency department. So whenever a sepsis code is called, you can hear it over the intercom. So they call a sepsis code in the emergency department. They get fluids and antibiotics on board, and then they don't send them up until they're stable. But for patients who I find are deteriorating, I usually just go with my gut. I try not to wait. Experience, I think, is the best teacher. And when you are a new nurse or a newer nurse, you're a bit at a disadvantage because you don't really know the signs of everything. Like you said, like the altered mental status. Somebody could have called a stroke code for that instead of a sepsis alert. You just really don't know. Experience really is the best teacher when it comes to assessing, reassessing your patient. So I had a patient that was deteriorating. Just looked terrible. So I just paged the doctor like, hey, something's not right here. I don't know what it is. I can't put my finger on it. It's not appropriate to call a sepsis alert yet, but I think you need to come assess the patient. So she came and assessed the patient, got some labs on him, and then after that, that's when we called the sepsis alert, because then it was seen that the patient needs a higher level of care, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I definitely think there is value in experience. Every time I come across something new in my mind, I make a mental note or I jot it down on my patient notes, and I keep that in my head. And next time I know exactly what to do.
I agree with your comments 100%. The challenges that we have is that we have so many new nurses that are out there, and a lot of the nurses don't have that confidence to call an alert for fear of being berated or it being used in a punitive way. One of my recommendations when hospitals are asking how we can improve sepsis response is, or what's the hesitation in calling a sepsis response, is don't be afraid. And nurses, experienced or not, we all seem to have this innate ability to pick up on something that's not right. And we might not know what we're looking at, but we know that something is amiss. And so I would encourage anyone that's listening to know what the sepsis criteria is, to understand that it's not just about fevers and infection, that any assessment that makes you think that there is an alteration in a body system should be cause for concern. I think one of the requests from leadership certainly would be to make them be very intentional with their conversations to bedside nurses, that it's okay to call the sepsis code, the response, whatever you call it, and be told everything's okay, than to ignore those symptoms, because you don't want to wait till it's too late.
Exactly. It's a shame that nurses don't feel comfortable,
Right.
making that call.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of hospitals definitely need a cultural shift, and to be met with disdain or punishment for making that call is just absolutely ridiculous. I know at the hospital I'm currently at, it's challenging because it's such a small hospital. A lot of the surgeons, et cetera, aren't in-house, which I'm not used to. You have to call them. So what you're doing, you're waking
Right.
someone up. But,
Yeah.
I don't care because that's what you're on call for.
Right.
It's your job.
Exactly.
Luckily, I'm a travel nurse. I've been a nurse. It'll be 6 years in August. In that short time, I learned so much.
Yeah.
And even now that I'm in my master's program at Duke University, I'm so glad that I decided to stay at the bedside for 5 years before I decided to go back and get my master's degree, because I don't care what anybody says. You need that time to develop your skill set and to become a better nurse, because when you put that time in, it helps you to be a better prepared advanced nurse.
I know you're going to soar and succeed in your master's program. And one of the reasons that's going to happen is because you have some insight now. You actually have experiences and stories to share rather than just learning them from case studies or simulation. You actually have learned experiences on the job.
Exactly.
I think the other thing for new nurses as well is some of the verbiage has changed about diagnosing sepsis along the way. And I think the very first stage, when we look at this systemic inflammatory response, I mean, those three words there, systemic, any body system can be impacted by a septic event. And we've really got to look at the patient holistically to determine what the problem is, or if there's a problem, and preempt that for sure. As I said, so much more beyond a fever and an infection. When you look at respiratory rate and heart rate, it's like, would you really call for a respiratory rate of 22 and a heart rate of 105? Is that really something to be concerned about? And if there's something else in line with that, then yes, absolutely, call. Be proactive rather than having a true emergency or a life-threatening emergency where the patient has to be transferred.
Exactly. Yeah. Make that call. We had a question come across, and I want to hear what you think about it, Caroline. In a perfect world, how could sepsis monitoring and response be improved?
Well, that's a great question. How could sepsis monitoring and response? Well, I think, first of all, the confidence to make the call. And second of all, the decrease in the fear that this might be seen as punitive if you call and it wasn't really necessary. I think whenever you're acting in the best interest of the patient, that has to be the number one priority, for sure. Most facilities now have sepsis protocols in place. And so I think sharing those protocols, educating to those protocols, and seeing that in evidence of daily work is really important. I think the only way we can improve upon it is not having the fear behind it, the what ifs behind it, not being sure, going back to that story that I shared. I had plenty of years under my belt. That's what's the embarrassing part about this. I had the experience, but it was just so many other things were going on that it was like, well, we'll just keep him on the back burner, keep a close eye on this guy, but now I have to go do this, and now I have to admit this person, now I have to get this post-op. So in the perfect world, involving your healthcare team as part of the assessment as well. Nursing assistants, sometimes they don't immediately recognize what's going on. So sharing with them the importance of those numbers and the parameters in which the nurse needs to know sooner rather than later.
I agree. And I really think this touches on the episode about continuous monitoring and how beneficial that can be for patients, is that we really need to make it custom across even med surg units to have more monitoring in place. It doesn't have to be invasive, but just something there, because it can be so difficult to implement hourly rounds. When I was a new nurse back in 2016, something that was instilled in me by both of my preceptors, because I was on 6 weeks a days and the rest of my orientation, 6 weeks a nights, were hourly rounds. And that was our hospital culture. Like, no matter what, you go in and you do your hourly rounds. Luckily, it's a great hospital, university-based hospital. So the ratio was 4-1 at the time. So, you have 4 patients, pretty stable. So you go in and you do your hourly rounds, document in the computer. Why? Because let's say you have a stroke alert. When was the last time you saw that patient normal? You could just go in and reference in the EMR your last hourly round. It was something that was ingrained in me. It's something I still do, even though in this version of Epic that I'm currently working in, like, it's not a specific place to put hourly round. I just put in the comment, hourly round, patient in bed, turn, stuff like that. So I think that's super important. Also, I think it has to do with organizational change. What changes is your organization willing to make as far as increasing technology, increasing surveillance for these patients, and also sort of streamlining a process of what to do when your patient needs a higher level of care. Unfortunately for this assignment, my funny story, my orientation was only 4 hours. Usually you get 2 complete nights of orientation. But for me, I only had 4 hours of orientation. So maybe 3 or 4 weeks into my assignment, I had to transfer someone to the ICU. Well, I didn't know what to do or what their protocols were. I knew I needed to get the patient out of there as soon as possible, but this place doesn't have any monitors like B450s like I'm used to. So what do I connect it to? Well, I had to connect them to the defibrillator on the code cart to monitor them on the way up to the ICU. I didn't know that. So I had to resource the nursing supervisor. But man, it would have been nice to have known that during my orientation.
Right. And you speak to certainly a challenge that I see from the other side of the coin, where I have a team of educators that do a lot of onboarding of travelers. Of course, the need for you to take care of patients is the number one priority. But before you do that, you have to be comfortable. You have to know the essentials. And so that's a great learning tool for the hospital leadership as they're orienting travelers, in that we have 4 hours. What can we do to be the most effective for you so that you know what you're doing? Not so much from the clinical nursing, because you've got that, but the ins and outs of the hospital policies and procedures. The perfect world is making sure that the hospital leaders are aware of what's out there and that the protocols are communicated and everyone understands what to do, and that there will be no punitive action if something is called unnecessarily. There's never an unnecessary call. If a med surg nurse is assessing a patient and feels like something is amiss, then a call should be placed in my mind. I would much rather have the sepsis team arrive and say, everything's good, than the worst case scenario happening.
It's really interesting to see. And I wish every hospital keep more data on patients who are septic, and when they was found they were septic, how long did it take to implement an intervention, and then the outcome. I really think that would be beneficial for nurses to see, especially new nurses. If you get on top of this early, your patient's outcome can be so much more favorable. And I think that's a part of education too, is tracking these numbers and these results so you can let your nurses know, hey, this is why we do what we do.
Oh, for sure. I couldn't agree with you more. Education is extremely important. And then the confidence to put that education into play, to call a sepsis alert when you're sitting on the fence wondering whether you should call it or not. If there's any doubt, then there's no doubt in my mind. If there's any doubt whether you should call, make that call. Think about the patient outcome. With the Friday, Monday story, when I went back and looked at the numbers, I said to myself, well, yeah, he probably should have made this call, but sometimes it depends on who you're working with as well and what response you're going to get when you make that call. But if there's any doubt, then there's no doubt. You should make the call always. There's a big takeaway from this episode for sure. I think the other thing that I would just like to remind everyone of is vital signs should be exactly that. They're vital to the assessment and the ultimate outcome of our patients. And oftentimes we do vitals because we do vitals. And in Med Surg, we do Q shift vitals. Well, most of us work 12 hours. And so I really would hope that those routine vitals are at least every 8 hours. In my mind, and obviously this is just my thoughts, if you're sick enough to be in the hospital, then we should be doing vital signs every 4 hours because so much can change with our patients. And so never be afraid to get an extra set of vitals and to look at the numbers and not just look at that individual set of numbers, but look at the trend. What's going on here? Is the heart rate increasing? Is respiratory rate increasing? That's not normal if that's happening. And so look at those numbers, use them for what they're there for, and that's to prevent negative patient outcomes.
I just encourage all of our listeners, especially new nurses, take on the challenge of really digging into reading about sepsis. If you are an AMSN member, you get a little magazine, a journal in the mail every month to read. There is valuable, meaty information in there. So I encourage all of you to do that.
Absolutely. And on that note, we will wrap up this episode of Med Surg Moments. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you next time.
Thank you, guys.
We encourage you to help us spread the word and subscribe to the Med Surg Moments podcast via your smartphone podcast app to receive notifications of future episodes. Please be sure to leave us a review, tell us how we're doing, and recommend Med Surg Moments wherever you get your podcasts to help us reach even more listeners. I also invite you to join the conversation by sharing your ideas and questions on AMSN's Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or Twitter pages. And don't forget to add hashtag MedSurgMoments to your post. Simply enter AMSN in the search field on any of these social media platforms to connect with us.
The content within the Med Surg Moments podcast represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of the co-hosts and may not necessarily reflect the views, thoughts, and opinions of the Academy of Medical Surgical Nurses. Until next time, I'm Chelsea.
And I'm Caroline. And always remember, Med Surg Moments is a moment in our lives, a moment in our Med Surg careers that make a huge difference.